In a previous video, I briefly introduced my type within the objective personality system as MF, NETI, consume, sleep, blast, play number 3. And now we're talking about kind of what that means to me and how I relate to it. So when I first jumped into the objective personality system, I thought that I was a MF, sleep, consume, blast, play. MF, NI, FI, consume, MF, NI, FI, sleep, consume, blast, play. This was from years and years and years of mulling over the theoretical research and trying to figure out so based on the language that Jung used, how do I relate to these psychological functions? And from that, I related to introverted intuition, extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, and extroverted sensation. And some of my closest friends used extroverted sensation. So I thought, hey, I relate to them. We must be using the same perception axis, even though we have a little bit of a discrepancy with the judgment axis. Or the decider axis. That could be a video about talking about the merger between objective personality terms and orthodox Jungian psychological theory. So how do I relate to using feminine extroverted intuition? And can you actually perceive what this visualization is supposed to stand for as a regular person that doesn't know anything about objective personality versus a person that's really familiar with the system? So in the previous video, I spoke about what MF meant in terms of the first letter being referred to sensory. So right, that's SI or SE, sensory. Wherever it exists within your grant function stack, within this grouping of 4 functions from most to least differentiated. And then NETI is being your first animal function to describe that first order differentiation in terms of the directionality of the type. And then consume, doubling back to NETI, so NT consume, and then ST sleep, and then SF blast, and then NF play. So consume, sleep, blast, play. That means that I'm using consume first, sleep second, blast third, and play fourth. So what does that mean for me in terms of my personal identity, in terms of how I think about the question of psychological types? For me, I think mostly in terms of structure and theory. So for me, I think, what is feminine extroverted intuition? There's no visualization on the screen right now, but that NE is supposed to be the feminine version of that split psychological function. So within the theory of objective personality, well, as far as I understand it, there's no longer the existence of 8 psychological functions. Those psychological functions have been viewed from a splitter's perspective in terms of this psychological distinction in academia and in larger contexts around the world in terms of a lumper's versus a splitter's convention. This is people constantly waxing and waning in terms of, hey, are you a lumper or are you a splitter? Are you a lumper or are you a splitter? In this case, the objective personality system is taking a splitter's argument for the distinction and the differentiation of the 8 psychological functions into 16 psychological functions by breaking them down the middle into some sort of yin/yang dichotomy related to sexual modalities. So now, instead of just extroverted intuition, it's feminine extroverted intuition and masculine extroverted intuition. Or you could say it the other way. You could say masculine extroverted intuition and feminine extroverted intuition. That chirality in terms of how you order those things has not yet sufficiently been delved into in terms of formal notation versus common notation. So I'm using in their system feminine extroverted intuition. And that right now, that resonates with me as I've grown to really understand or to project into the system. Whoa, so what does it mean to follow the patterns? I currently work as a content curator on YouTube. So that means trying to track and trace the things that I consume and then to organize it into bundles for other people. But it has started off for me as a way to synthesize what I've quote unquote learned, understood, or come across. I come across so many interesting concepts. This year is probably, or last year was the Overshoot Culture Commentary year, where it just became a lot about learning about Overshoot, like consuming culture commentary related to Overshoot. Paul Ehrlich, Paul Beckwith, Michael Dowd, Sam Mitchell, Environmental Coffee House, all of these channels that really stick with, hey, what do you think about Overshoot? What do you think about collapse? And there was a great series from Andrea P. on collapse narratives and why it's all but assured. But as a person that follows psychological types, for me, I'm saying, whoa. This, what I like about objective personality is not just the ability to say, oh, hey, this thing it's new. It's like it's a new typology system. I'm like, no. It builds on top of the work of Carl Gustav Jung, and what he did was frame out a very strong theoretical basis for the existence of the psyche, a psyche, as a phenomenon in its own right. And I think that that's a powerful philosophical lens. But again, back to the core posit of the work, Carl Jung frames these ideas back to, where is this? In the chapter 1, chapter 1, the problem of types in the history of classical and medieval thought. He does an extraordinary job of going through one of the most underlooked pillars of psychological differentiation in terms of philosophy, and that's localizing psychological functions with actual views and positions that people take up in general or specific. So when he brought out nominalism and / or realism as being an attribution of psychological functions in terms of preferences for inherence, preferences for predication, and that dichotomy as being linked to an attitude orientation or a sexual modality or a specific perception axis or a specific judgment axis in terms of observers, in terms of deciders, that is super, super interesting. So again, chapter 1, part 4, nominalism and realism, an incredible, powerful chapter to dip into. But back to me, I remember in one of the first videos that I said, hey, this is a stream of consciousness, as if I was providing a technical grade blast. But it's also an experiment for me to just kind of speak out what I'm thinking about. And because of the context of objective personality, it also becomes an interesting case study into understanding, okay, so for this specific type within this specific system, how do you as a consumer relate to me through this digital abstraction, but also what am I saying? What type of quote unquote blast is this? Can I pause and use dead space for a little bit of sleep processing? So that was really nice for me. I keep on looking at the screen and seeing, okay, so did I cover my theoretical basis so that somebody just jumping in would say, okay, what does MF mean and what does NETI mean versus if it said NEFE, then it would mean play. So that would mean that my first function would be play instead of consume. So that's why it could say MF, consume, sleep, blast, play, but how would you know which psychological functions were involved? So this is where we get into common notation versus formal notation, because for me, I would, in terms of differentiating the specific function that I'm using, I would say that I use OE 1 to 2, FM, NT, consume. So that's feminine extroverted intuition, and we kind of started on that again because it's like, based on that as a conceptualization, I'm saying, whoa, the patterns seem so airy-fairy for me. It seems so... I started curating playlists because I could consume so much content, but I couldn't map out the actual intent behind what it was that we were speaking about. Behind what it was that the actual core conceptualization. Like if you grilled me on what is overshoot culture commentary and how does that relate to the question of psychological types, I would say, okay, you have Charles C. Mann's work on a prophet and a wizard, and you have Jung's work in terms of nominalism and / or realism. So I'm thinking that a prophet can be, if we had the statistics to type people and to get their subjective personal views on reality, then that you might be able to apply that to nominalism and realism, and you might be able to apply that to a prophet and / or a wizard in terms of how people view the climate crisis. But where I'm at is I used to say that I was a prophet that gave deference to the wizards, but now I think that I'm a wizard that gives deference to the prophets, because if I looked at my own actions in terms of techno-optimism and whether or not it's worth it to carry on the human superorganism as it's been characterized, I would say that no matter what, it's all about establishing a higher technical shelf in terms of support and resistance for a quality of life, standard of life, but so much of that has been underwritten by how we subsidized energy, specifically fossil resources, in terms of just everything that comes out of a barrel of oil, not just the human labor equivalent work, but also the materials, such as plastics. So yeah, jumping around, that remains to be a very interesting part of research that I'd like to see done in terms of people's personal characterizations. Hey, do they think that they're a prophet? Do they think they're a wizard? I think that was just an overview to say, now I think that I'm a wizard that gives deference to the prophets because I consume so much overshoot culture commentary that I'm like, whoa, I don't think the prophets will be able to techno-optimize our way out of it. And if it does, what will that mean for the biosphere? I think that's the scariest reality. What would it mean to have infinite energy? And what would that mean in terms of overshoot? Hashtag William Catton. But, so yeah, that's feminine NE and masculine TI. In a future video, I'll get into the later functions.